You think you know where your money goes. You track the big expenses. You know your rent, your car payment, your health insurance. But there's a category of spending that most people never see. Invisible expenses that operate in the background of your financial life, silently draining thousands of dollars every single year. These aren't big purchases. They're small, recurring, automatic. So automatic that you stopped noticing them years ago. A streaming subscription you don't watch anymore. A gym membership you never use, apps charging your card every month, insurance policies you forgot you signed up for, premium versions of services you could be using for free, subscriptions stacked on top of other subscriptions. And because each one is small, $15 here, $12 there, your brain doesn't register them as real expenses. But they add up. A study from the University of Chicago found that the average person has 17 active subscriptions they're not fully using. And the total cost? Over $2,500 per year. In this video, you're going to discover the psychology behind why companies hide these expenses and why your brain refuses to see them. And more importantly, you're going to learn the exact audit process that reveals every invisible drain on your account and how to eliminate them without feeling like you're giving anything up. Because the biggest surprise isn't that these expenses exist. It's how much they add up to when you finally stop to count them. Stay until the end. What I'm going to reveal about how companies use psychology to keep these expenses invisible will completely change the way you look at your bank statement. Let me tell you about Robert. He's 57 years old, a retired engineer, drawing a solid pension plus consulting income that rounds out his budget quite comfortably. He described himself as a financially organized person, and in many ways, he genuinely was. He knew exactly what he paid in homeowners association fees, health insurance, and property taxes. He kept a spreadsheet of his fixed expenses that he updated every single month. When his kids asked how he managed his money, he explained his system with pride. The problem is that Robert's spreadsheet had an enormous hole in it, and that hole was in exactly the expenses he thought didn't exist. One day, out of curiosity, he decided to do something he had never actually done before. Look at his credit card statement not to check the total, but to read each line individually, one by one. The exercise took 40 minutes, and by the end, Robert was staring at a list of 23 recurring charges he had not consciously planned for that month. Some he recognized immediately. Others took him a moment to remember where they came from. 3 of them. 3. He simply could not identify even after searching the company name on Google. And the total of those 23 charges? $380 per month, over $4,500 per year, leaving his account every single month without him knowing he was spending it. The first thing that needs to be understood about invisible expenses is that they are not invisible by accident. There is a deliberate architecture built on decades of behavioral psychology research that was specifically designed to make these expenses as difficult as possible to notice and as difficult as possible to cancel. Companies that operate on subscription models, and today that includes everything from entertainment platforms to software, gyms, delivery services, insurance, and dozens of other industries, know exactly what they are doing when they set the monthly price, the billing date, the cancellation process, and the way the charge appears on your statement. None of that is random. All of it has been tested, optimized, and refined to maximize the retention of customers who, if they had to make an active decision about whether to keep paying, probably wouldn't. Have you ever stopped to think about why canceling a subscription is almost always harder than signing up for one? Why you have to call in, wait on hold, speak to a representative who will offer you a discount before finally letting you go? That is not a coincidence. It is intentional design rooted in behavioral psychology applied directly to business. The central psychological mechanism behind invisible expenses has a technical name: status quo inertia. But the practical explanation is very simple. The human brain has a powerful, well-documented preference for keeping things the way they are. Changing requires cognitive energy. Staying the same requires nothing. And when a charge is already set up, already automated, already part of your established financial reality, your mental system treats it as part of the scenery, not as a decision that needs to be revisited. Researchers at Columbia University studied this phenomenon in detail and found that the likelihood of a person canceling a subscription after a free trial period drops by more than 60% when cancellation requires more than 3 steps. 3 steps. We're not talking about a complicated process. We're talking about 3 clicks or 3 minutes on the phone. And yet the difference in behavior is 60%. That gives you a precise picture of how thoroughly the system was designed to exploit inertia, and how little effort is required to keep someone paying for something they don't use and may not even remember they have. And here's something that will surprise you even more. Status quo inertia doesn't hit less organized or less intelligent people the hardest. In fact, research shows that people with a stronger sense of financial control tend to underestimate the impact of small recurring charges even more, precisely because they trust their control system without realizing that system has structural blind spots. Robert was an organized person. He had a spreadsheet, a method, discipline. And yet $380 was leaving his account every month without him noticing. Not because he was careless, but because the system draining his money was designed to be invisible to people exactly like him, to people who trust their own sense of control. Do you recognize yourself in that? Because if you do, what I'm about to reveal next is especially important for you. There is a second psychological mechanism that works alongside status quo inertia to make invisible expenses even harder to detect, and it has to do with the way the brain processes small amounts relative to the total budget. Behavioral economists call it proportional neglect, but I'm going to explain it in a way that will make immediate sense. When you consider a $15 expense in the context of a monthly budget of $5,000, your brain automatically performs a relativizing operation. $15 is 0.3% of the total. It's irrelevant. It's not worth the mental energy to analyze, question, or cancel. And that reasoning in isolation actually makes a certain kind of sense. Cognitive energy is a limited resource, and it makes sense to reserve it for big decisions. The problem is that the same reasoning is applied to each small charge individually, and never to all of them as a group. Your brain evaluates each $12 subscription as irrelevant, but never adds up the fact that you have 15 $12 subscriptions, which represents $180 a month and over $2,000 a year. Proportional neglect operates item by item, and the total cost remains invisible because it is never processed as a whole. Companies exploit this with extraordinary precision when they set subscription prices. It is not a coincidence that most subscriptions are priced below $15 per month. That amount was calculated to stay below the average consumer's threshold of conscious attention, the point at which a charge starts to feel significant enough to warrant evaluation. Above that threshold, people weigh, compare, and question. Below it, the charge goes unnoticed month after month, year after year. And the company knows that 12 charges of $12.99 add up to $155 annually. But that the consumer will never do that math because the brain is not programmed to spontaneously add up small recurring amounts. Think about it honestly. You know exactly what you pay in rent. You know what you pay for your kid's school. You know what you pay on your car loan. But do you know, off the top of your head, the exact total of all your subscriptions combined? If the answer is no, and for most people it is, you are experiencing proportional neglect in real time. The third psychological mechanism that keeps invisible expenses running is perhaps the most sophisticated of all, and it has to do not with how your brain processes the amount, but with how it processes the act of paying. It's called billing psychological distance, and it works like this. When a charge happens automatically, without any action on your part, without any friction, without any moment of conscious decision, it becomes psychologically distant from the experience of spending money. You don't feel like you spent. You simply have less money in your account, and there is a measurable neurological difference between those two experiences. Neuroimaging studies have shown that when a person pays for something actively, hands over cash, inserts a card, types a PIN, brain regions associated with pain and cost are activated. That activation creates an emotional memory of the transaction, which in turn creates awareness of the expense. When payment is automatic, silent, and frictionless, that activation doesn't happen. There is no emotional memory. There is no conscious record that a purchase occurred. The money leaves, but the experience of spending does not exist. This explains something Robert described when I walked him through the statement exercise. He told me, "I know this money was leaving. It's right here on the statement. But I feel like I never spent this money. It's like it just evaporated." That feeling is not an illusion or a lack of attention. It is the predictable result of how the brain processes or fails to process automatic, frictionless transactions. And that is exactly why the subscription model with automatic credit card billing is so powerful from a business perspective. It completely removes the conscious experience of spending, and without that experience, there is no trigger to reconsider whether the expense still makes sense. Do you know what the difference is between a gym that bills you manually and one that charges your credit card automatically every month? The cancellation rate. Gyms with automatic card billing have significantly lower cancellation rates, not because members are more satisfied, but because the absence of friction eliminates the moment of decision in which the person would realize they haven't been using the service. And now that you understand the three mechanisms that create and sustain invisible expenses, status quo inertia, proportional neglect, and billing psychological distance, you have what you need to understand why the audit process I'm about to describe works where other methods fail. Most people, when they decide to get better control of their spending, start writing down what they consciously buy: lunch, a piece of clothing, a gift for someone. But invisible expenses don't show up in that log because they never passed through consciousness in the first place. They weren't purchased, they were charged. And there is an enormous difference between those two things from a psychological standpoint. To find what never passed through your awareness, you need a method that bypasses the conscious memory filter entirely and goes straight to the source, your bank statement and your credit card statement, line by line, without exception. The complete financial audit process starts with an exercise that sounds simple, but that most people have never genuinely done. Pulling up or printing out the full statements from the last 3 months, both your checking account and every credit card, and going through each line with a single question in mind. Do I remember making the decision to pay for this? Not, do I recognize this name? Because you may recognize the name of a charge that has been automatic for so long you no longer remember signing up for it. The right question is whether you remember the moment of decision. If the answer is yes, the charge is conscious. If the answer is no, or if you need to search to figure out what it even is, you have found an invisible expense. Robert did this exercise and found, across the previous 3 months, a total of 41 charges that didn't pass the conscious decision test. 41. In 3 months. Many were subscriptions he knew he had, but had automated to the point of no longer registering consciously. Others were charges from services contracted for specific moments, a trip, a project, a one-time need that kept being billed long after the need had passed. And some, as I mentioned earlier, he simply couldn't identify at all. Have you ever done this exercise? Have you ever pulled up a statement and read each line individually, asking yourself if you remember the decision? If you never have, there is a very high probability that the result will be surprising, and not pleasantly so. Because what research consistently shows is that the gap between what people believe they spend on subscriptions and recurring services and what they actually spend is enormous. A study published in the Journal of Consumer Research found that consumers underestimate their subscription spending by an average of 80%. 80%. That means if you think you spend $150 a month on subscriptions, the real number is probably closer to $270. And if you think you spend $80, it's probably closer to $144. Not because you're inattentive, but because the system was designed to guarantee exactly that level of underestimation. After identifying each invisible charge, the second step of the audit process is to sort those charges into 3 distinct groups, and this categorization matters because it determines the action you'll take with each one. The first group is charges you recognize, use regularly, and would consciously choose to keep paying for if you had to make the decision fresh today. These stay. Not because they're automatic, but because they pass the renewed conscious decision test. The second group is charges you recognize but don't use, or use so rarely that the amount being charged doesn't correspond to the value you're actually receiving. These are direct candidates for cancellation, and the cancellation process should happen immediately on the same day as the audit, before status quo inertia has a chance to operate again. The third group, and this is the most revealing one, is charges you can't clearly identify, charges you don't remember signing up for, or charges that are still hitting your account for services you canceled some time ago, but that, due to some failure in the cancellation process, kept generating bills. For these, the action is different. You need to investigate the source, contact the company, and in most cases, request a refund for the periods billed without your knowledge. Robert, as he worked through this process with method and patience, arrived at some numbers that genuinely surprised him. In the group of charges he consciously decided to keep, there were 12 services. Some he truly used and valued, others he had underestimated his use of, but, upon reflection, realized were worth what he was paying. In the immediate cancellation group, there were 8 subscriptions, totaling $190 per month that he decided to take back. And in the third group, the most revealing one, there were 3 charges he couldn't identify, and one that was a service he had tried to cancel months earlier, but that had kept billing him due to a failure in the cancellation process. That fourth case resulted in a refund of nearly $200. In total, the audit exercise freed up $300 a month in spending that Robert neither valued nor had consciously chosen to maintain. $300 that, invested consistently, represent something meaningful over the span of a few years, not because the monthly amount is transformative on its own, but because it was money being lost with zero emotional, practical, or financial return. There is one aspect of the audit process that most people underestimate, and that is, in practice, what determines whether the results of the audit will last or whether you'll be in the same situation a year from now. It's called reference point recalibration, and it works like this. After canceling the subscriptions that aren't worth keeping, your brain needs time to adjust to a new spending reference point. During the first few weeks after the audit, it's common to feel a mild sense of deprivation, not because you're genuinely missing anything valuable, but because your brain is still using the old standard as its benchmark. This feeling fades naturally within 4 to 6 weeks, as the new pattern establishes itself as the new normal. The problem is that many people, when they feel that transitional discomfort, reactivate 1 or 2 of the canceled services, not because they need them, but to relieve the discomfort of change. And then the cycle starts over. The way around this is to create a waiting rule. If you feel the urge to reactivate a canceled subscription, wait 30 days before making that decision. In most cases, the urge disappears well before 30 days are up, and in the cases where it's still present after a month, that's probably a genuine signal that the service actually has real value for you, and consciously reactivating it is a perfectly valid decision. There is also a fourth psychological mechanism that companies use to complicate not just the perception of invisible expenses, but the actual cancellation process once you've finally spotted them. Psychologists call it the endowment effect, and it describes the brain's tendency to place higher value on something it already possesses, even if that possession is a digital service or a subscription. When you call to cancel a gym membership or a streaming service, the representative doesn't argue just about the price. They argue about what you're going to lose. You have access to over 50,000 titles. You can use it as much as you want. You get exclusive member discounts. Every one of those arguments is activating the endowment effect, reminding you of benefits you technically have but don't actually use, in order to create the feeling that canceling is a significant loss. You know that guilty feeling you get when you cancel your gym membership in January after signing up with so much enthusiasm in December. That isn't genuine guilt. It's the endowment effect being triggered by the contrast between what you imagined you'd use and what you actually used. And companies know that feeling is one of the most powerful barriers to cancellation. The most effective way to neutralize the endowment effect during the cancellation process is a simple technique. Before you call or click to cancel, write down on paper, Physically, not on your phone. The last time you used the service in question and for how long. Not what you plan to use, what you actually used. This exercise of anchoring to concrete reality directly counters the narrative of benefits you're going to lose with the objective evidence of benefits you never actually had in practice. And when the comparison is made on that basis, reality versus imagination, the cancellation process becomes far less emotionally loaded. Robert used this technique to cancel the gym he visited, on average, once a month, paying $120 monthly for a service that, in practice, cost him $120 per visit. When he wrote that down on paper and confronted himself with the real number, the cancellation he had been putting off for months happened in under 5 minutes. The question that remains, after understanding all of this, is this: what do you do with the money you recover? And here, there is a risk that needs to be named clearly, because it is common and completely understandable from a psychological standpoint. The risk is that the money freed up by the audit gets quickly absorbed by other equally unplanned expenses, replacing one set of invisible expenses with a different set. This happens because the brain, as we discussed, has a powerful tendency to adapt to whatever level of spending is available. If $300 suddenly becomes available in your account every month, the brain's natural behavior is to find ways to use it, consciously or unconsciously. The only way to prevent this is to make an active, immediate decision about where that money is going before it dissolves into the general budget. Robert decided, on the same day as the audit, to set up an automatic transfer of $250 to an investment account that could only be accessed with a 90-day withdrawal period, creating an intentional friction that made accessing the money harder than simply spending it. The remaining $50 he kept in his checking account as a safety margin. In 12 months, the investment account had accumulated $3,000 that, without the audit, would simply have evaporated into charges he never would have noticed. And that is the central point of everything we discussed in this video. Invisible expenses are not just a financial problem, they are a problem of awareness. They are the space between what you believe you decide and what actually happens to your money. The larger that space, the greater the silent cost you pay every month in exchange for nothing. And the real good news is that closing that space doesn't require extraordinary discipline, doesn't require painful sacrifices, doesn't require completely overhauling your lifestyle. It requires only one act of awareness. Stop. Look line by line, ask yourself if you made the decision, and act on what you find. An exercise that takes a few hours and that can free up thousands of dollars per year that were being lost, not because you spent them, but because you didn't know they were leaving. The question that matters now is not whether you'll do your audit. After everything we've discussed, the answer to that question is already clear. The question is when. Write in the comments the number you discovered when you did, or when you go to do, your own audit. I read everything. And if you want specific guidance on what to do with what you find, I'll respond directly with the next step. See you in the next video.